History tells the story of the world and of our lives. Sometimes that history goes bump in the night. Broadcasting from the center of oddity and the supernatural in Central Florida, it's the History Goes Bump podcast.
Hello, you spectacular people. Welcome to this 546th episode of the History Goes Bump podcast. Ghost Tours for the Theater of the Mind. I'm your host, Diane.
And this is Kelly.
Kelly, on this episode, we're going up to Canada, to Winnipeg. This is a location suggested by our listener, Kim Bergen. It's Hamilton House. This place was a psychical hotbed, and it still is to this day.
Wow.
This is basically their, I would say, kind of like their Casadega.
Very cool.
So looking forward to bringing that to everyone. We definitely have some interesting stuff that happened in this house, and now it is interestingly haunted as well. Before we get into that, we have one person to welcome into the spectacular crew. Big welcome to Patricia.
Thank you so much for joining our Facebook group.
And now this moment in Oddity.
The moment in Oddity was suggested by Chelsea Flowers. Many people and animals have a natural fear of lightning. Powerful and beautiful in its own right, lightning can also be very destructive. A clear example of lightning's power occurred back in August of 2016. On Norway's Hardangervidda Plateau, an unbelievable weather event took place. The unimaginable aftermath was discovered by a park ranger who found 323 wild tundra reindeer which had been killed by an unusual lightning event. After the mass kill-off, instead of removing the carcasses, the park decided to leave the reindeer's bodies where they were. They allowed nature to take its course, thus giving scientists the opportunity to study this island of decomposition and how it might change the Arctic tundra ecosystem. Predators in the form of wolverines, golden eagles, and Arctic foxes exploited the easy meals afforded to them while the getting was fresh. Then scavengers like ravens and crows moved in. From there, the landscape of fear in the animal world was additionally studied by the scientists. The decisions animals made in relation to food versus safety trade-offs was revealed as scientists watched the carcasses of bloated reindeer bodies decompose into dry skeletons. With such an unusual situation afforded to scientists to observe, it's easy to imagine that much was learned during the study. However, a beautiful Norwegian plateau covered by over 300 desiccating reindeer carcasses caused by a freak storm of nature certainly is odd.
And I would imagine quite stinky.
I would imagine so.
Get out.
And now, this month in history.
In the United States, on the third Wednesday of every July, one particular food item is celebrated, and to many Americans, it's the epitome of summer. Some of us of a certain age can recall the commercial jingle, "Oh, I wish I was an Oscar Mayer wiener. That is what I'd truly like to be. 'Cause if I was an Oscar Mayer wiener, everyone would be in love with me." Sorry, killed your ears, I'm sure. Whether you love pinks, Oscar Mayer, Dodger dogs, turkey, or veggie dogs, this particular barbecue fare for Americans just screams summer. Fun fact, over 25 million hot dogs are sold at baseball stadiums every year. Whether your dogs are grilled, pan-fried, rotisseried, toasted over a campfire, or boiled, they are sure to satisfy, especially with such a variety of toppings. If you're a purist, then you will go with just mustard and ketchup. Or you can add onion, relish, chili, mayo, cheese, and even sauerkraut. The toppings can go on and on. According to the website National Day Calendar, on May 31st, 2012, a world record was set for the most expensive hot dog. The California Capital City Dog sold for $145.49 at Capital Dog in Sacramento, California. That particular hot dog consisted of a grilled 18-inch all-beef in natural casing frank from Chicago, served on a fresh-baked herb and oil focaccia roll spread with white truffle butter, then grilled and topped with whole grain mustard from France, garlic and herb mayonnaise, sautéed chopped shallots, organic mixed baby greens, maple syrup, marinated fruit wood, smoked uncured bacon from New Hampshire, chopped tomatoes, sweetened dried cranberries, moose cheese from Sweden, basil olive oil, and pear cranberry coconut balsamic vinaigrette, and ground peppercorn. Golly, who the hell came up with that?
No wonder it was $145 some odd dollars.
It was probably about 2,000 calories.
I'm sure.
That sounds like quite the intermingling of flavors for one's taste buds. Proceeds from the sale of each 3-pound super dog were donated to the Shriners Hospitals for Children that year. To those who will be celebrating National Hot Dog Day on July 17th this year, enjoy.
Dr. T.G. Hamilton was a trailblazer in the field of paranormal research. Hamilton was a medical doctor, and because of his experiences with death, he began to wonder if there was a way that we could figure out what happens to us after we die. Hamilton and his family moved into a large home in Winnipeg, and it was here that he carried out much of his research, along with his wife. Their children continued the legacy of peering behind the veil, and perhaps that is why the Hamilton House of Winnipeg, Canada, is said to be haunted. Join us as we explore the history and hauntings of Hamilton House.
The area where the Hamilton House stands was named Elmwood after the nearby cemetery of the same name that opened in 1902. This neighborhood would become one of the most industrialized areas of Winnipeg. Winnipeg itself was founded at the confluence of the Assiniboine and Red Rivers. The name Winnipeg comes from the Cree words Win and Nippy, meaning murky water. Many First Nation tribes made this their home, from the Red River Métis to the Ojibwe to the Dakota peoples and, of course, the Cree. Europeans built several forts in the area to facilitate fur trading, and the Red River settlement was started in 1812 by Scottish farmers. They were known as Selkirk settlers, and their presence intensified issues between the two fur trading companies in the area, Hudson's Bay Company and the Northwest Company. There was a battle and a merger. The unincorporated village of Winnipeg emerged from the Red River settlement in 1862, and Winnipeg eventually was incorporated in 1873.
Thomas Glendenning Hamilton, or T.G., was born in 1873 in Toronto. His early years were spent in a sod house. When he was 10, his family moved to Saskatchewan, and his father died shortly thereafter. His mother moved the family to Winnipeg in 1891. T.G. attended Manitoba College, and then moved on to medical school and graduated from Manitoba Medical College in 1903. He married Lillian May Forrester in 1906, and they would have 4 children. Margaret, Glenn, and Arthur and James, who were twins. In 1910, Dr. Hamilton and Lillian moved into a house at 185 Kelvin Street, which is today 183 Henderson Highway, in Winnipeg, that the doctor would set up as his medical office. The medical practice was on the main level, and surgery was in the basement, and the family lived on the upper 2 floors. The house was built in the classic revivalist style, which combined Greek and Roman embellishments with columns. It has a simple elegance. There's nothing particularly special about it on the surface.
But boy, does the inside have a lot of stuff going on. T.G. was a well-respected practitioner who eventually became president of the Manitoba Medical Association, president of the Canadian Medical Association, the founder of the Manitoba Medical Bulletin, and a fellow at the American College of Surgeons. So he's not the type of man one would assume would get involved in the paranormal field. So I wanted to point out all that stuff to begin with, because this is not a guy you think is going to be chasing after ghosts. But that is just what he did. He became the first president of the Winnipeg Society for Psychical Research. T.G.'s journey into the paranormal started with the death of his son Arthur, who died from the Spanish flu in 1919. He had a deep desire to know what had become of his son after death. And don't we all understand that quest, Kelly?
Absolutely.
I mean, we all want to know what happens not only to us, but to our loved ones after they die. Because of his background, TG wanted to use science to figure out where we go after we die. Hamilton would join an international group of scientists exploring psychical phenomenon who were well respected, like Nobel Prize-winning French physiologist Charles Robert Richet and British chemist and physicist Sir William Crookes. Hamilton first investigated telepathy, and after being satisfied that this was a thing, he moved on to telekinesis and then to working with mediums.
The Hamilton family all took part in experiments and research, and they documented everything in pictures and text. These documents are called fonts, and the Hamilton family donated their fonts to the University of Manitoba. This research was conducted from 1918 to 1945 and covered all aspects of spiritualism and unexplained activity, from teleplasm to telekinesis to psychic phenomenon. The collection includes 1,300 notes and documentation and 700 photos. The Hamiltons held hundreds of seances in their home, and most accounts claim that they hosted 1,000 in a room of their house. We worked our way through many of the photos. There is a teleplasm coming from a woman's mouth that has the face of a man in the center of it. It looks like a photo that's been placed in the middle of cotton. The teleplasm had to have been a favorite because there are many pictures of this. Some are just barely forming at the mouth, and others have pictures, some with as many as 5 pictures in the middle. One of these pictures featuring 3 faces we'll share on Instagram, and it was described as a photograph of a teleplasmic mass that contains the faces of Lillian Hamilton's Aunt Christine and her brothers that appeared during a seance at the home of the British chemist Mr. Myers in August 1932.
And for people who don't know what we're talking about with teleplasm, this is how they basically described ectoplasm. So we all know ectoplasm is like that white stuff that would come out of the nose and the mouth of mediums. Right. I have long wondered what in the world that was. Sometimes it looks like cotton, sometimes it looks like cheesecloth, and then the pictures that show up in the middle of it look like they were pictures that were cut out and then put in the middle.
Yeah, it doesn't look very realistic.
But it's like, how in the world did they pull that off if everybody in the room isn't in on it? Like, you could see them staging photos, but even with this medium, like, how do you make it look like this? Just, you you just quick in the dark, push it up against your face. I don't know. But as Kelly said there are hundreds of photographs in this collection, and many of them feature this teleplasm with these pictures in the middle of it. One of the favorite experiments of the Hamiltons was table tipping. A friend had visited their house and asked if they'd ever tried it, and he explained that it was an old parlor game he had witnessed in the old country. He'd experimented with it and gotten good results. The Hamiltons were intrigued, and they bought a small wooden table that was about the size of a piano bench. They sat on 2 sides and had 2 other people sit on the other sides, and everyone placed their fingertips lightly on the table. And I believe there were other people around the room that were watching this. The table immediately became agitated, described as though it were in the hand of a giant, and it began to pound up and down and tilted on 2 legs. The action was described as aggressive. The Hamiltons then began to call out letters of the alphabet, and the table would tip to indicate which letter was chosen. Lillian's mother was there, and she wrote down the letters on paper. After a few minutes, the experiment was stopped, and the lights turned up so that they could study the message. The message had come from somebody claiming their name was Myers, and he said he was the chief spokesman. The message was, quote, Plato, Book 10, Allegory Very True. Read Lodge, trust his religious sense, Myers and Stead are here, Stead answers doctor's questions, end quote.
The Hamiltons weren't acquainted with the works of Plato, so they certainly didn't know that there were 10 books in Plato's The Republic. Book 10 was Plato's argument that philosophy-based education was superior to traditional poetry-based education. At his time, poets were thought to be the wisest. The Myers who brought the message was Frederick W. H. Myers, who founded the Society for Psychical Research. He had passed in 1901, and he put forward the idea that the human self survives bodily death, and he tried proving this through his own psychical research. Myers was described as a man who had lost his Christian faith and was seeking a new religion that would reassure him that the soul went on after death. The name Lodge referred to Oliver Lodge, who was a Christian spiritualist who wrote Survival of Man in 1909. The name Stead referred to the famous journalist and spiritualist William T. Stead, who died on board the Titanic. During his first seance, a spirit communicated to him a prophecy. "Young man, you are going to be the St. Paul of spiritualism." He popularized psychical research through his writings, and he founded the magazine Borderland in 1893 with the renowned medium Ada Goodrich Freer. The focus of the magazine was on spiritualism and research of the paranormal.
Kelly, let us just stop here for a moment and pull the listeners into a rabbit hole with a big side of synchronicity, shall we?
Let's go for it.
All right, down we go. Hello?
Hello?
We're down here in the rabbit hole.
And we've brought you with us.
The day before I started the research for this episode, I was going through the movies that are on Plato TV, and I saw that Titanic was on. So I turned it on. It's one of my favorite movies. I've probably seen it about 200 times, but I was like, I haven't seen it in a while, and it had just started, so I'm like, let me turn it on. About 30 minutes into the movie, I decided to check my messages on Instagram, and I saw that our listener Jimmy Tucker had sent a reel about a flood at the suburban Chicago Titanic exhibit, and this had just happened like in the previous 3 days. The strange thing about the story is that no one could find the source of the water. There were no pipe leaks. This wasn't from a flood of rain. It was a complete mystery. You can find the story from a couple weeks ago if you Google it. So we have a weird phenomenon connected to a Titanic exhibit, and I'm learning about this while I'm randomly watching the movie
Titanic.
Okay, so I'm already going, whoa, that's weird. So I messaged Jimmy back, and I'm like, oh, this is bizarre. I know you sent this a couple hours ago, but I just happened to look at it right now, and I'm watching the movie Titanic. Fast forward to the next day, and here we have this Stead who, or maybe it's Steed, I'm not sure, but I just said Stead because it looks like Instead, who died on the Titanic. And here's some strangeness with that. The British Association for Victorian Studies published an article entitled Ghostly Messages from Beyond the Titanic, W.T. Stead, Spiritualism and the Blue Island. And this is from the article. For his spiritualist daughter Estelle, her father's tragic death was merely the beginning of a series of extended seance communications she would have with him through the medium Pardo Woodman, purportedly voiced by her father after the Titanic's sinking. Estelle and Woodman published The Blue Island, Experiences of a New Arrival Beyond the Veil, in which Stead revealed his journey into the spirit world from floating above the sinking Titanic to his observations of the spirit world's aesthetic appearance. In climactic detail, the narrative opens with Stead relaying emotive descriptions of the ship's destruction and the effect on the spirits who passed on. Here were hundreds of bodies floating in the water, dead. Hundreds of souls carried through the air alive. Very much alive some were. Many, realizing their deaths had come, were enraged at their own powerlessness to save their valuables. They fought to save what they had on earth prized so much. The scene on the boat at the time of striking was not pleasant, but it was as nothing to the scene among the poor souls newly thrust out of their bodies all unwillingly. The rest of the narrative is lighter in tone, focusing on practical details of the afterlife, including the clothes ghosts wear. I'd love to know that information. Architecture in the spirit world, and the change in corporeal desires, such as not needing to smoke, and only consuming food as a means of refreshment rather than as vital sustenance. However, it was the triviality of many of these details that led one critic to deem Stead's bold visualization of the afterlife a trifle dull.
Oh, well, alrighty then.
Yeah, it's just so dull. I mean, you just eat because you want to taste it. Okay, so we've got that narrative. I am sitting here watching Titanic. Jimmy has sent me this thing about this mysterious thing happening at a Titanic exhibit. I'm looking at notes, and boom, all of a sudden I'm seeing Stead died on the Titanic, and here is him talking to his daughter about what he saw as the Titanic is sinking and all these people are dying. So it's like boom, boom, boom. And then a couple nights later, you show me a video of a guy on the street in New York City trying to convince people to sing a song while he plays his guitar.
Yeah, a street
performer.
Right.
And he's trying to get people to come over and join him. And of course, most people are walking by and please leave me alone. I don't want to do it. He manages to wrangle in this girl because he's like, hey, that looks like a rock star over there who happens to be her father. So they come over and it turns out that her father really is a rock star. He's in the band Foreigner.
Right.
So then she's talking to the guy about, he's got these 400 songs. Go ahead and choose whichever one you want, which happened to be September by Earth, Wind & Fire, which has a special significance to you and I. We won't get into that.
Indeed.
But he's asking her some questions about herself. And so she's telling him that they'd just come from a performance of Titanic, which was just a couple blocks over.
Which is Titanic, but with a QUE at the end.
Yes. So you and I are like, wait, what is that? It's something that I actually would love to see, because it turns out that this is a parody of Titanic featuring the songs of Celine Dion, and a woman who's portraying Dion breaks into a bunch of the scenes being reenacted on stage, singing her songs, as well as the cast sings her songs too.
It was very entertaining just to watch the little video.
So if you haven't heard of it, I encourage you to Google it and watch some of the scenes and stuff from this play. It's in various cities around the country. I think it's only in New York here in America. But now we've had our fourth synchronicity dealing with Titanic, all while I'm working on the notes for this episode. So let us just say, if we were scheduled to take a cruise anytime soon, we would be canceling. All this Titanic was just a bit too much. How are we going to get out of this rabbit hole, Kelly?
There's a lifeboat. You think Mark can pull us out?
But we're going to need some water to lift the lifeboat up out of the rabbit hole.
Well, we're surrounded by water, so that'll probably be pretty easy.
So we just need more to pull the cork out of the ocean near Florida and flood this little rabbit hole.
Indeed, he can do it.
I mean, the water table is higher here in Florida. Mort, pull that cork.
Let's pop this cork.
And now a little break for a word about one of our sponsors.
Okay, so back to this message they got while doing the table tipping. The Hamiltons saw the message as evidence that they should continue on, and they regularly held table sittings with the same group that had been in the room when they had this first message. In February 1921, Lillian started meeting with the family's nanny, Elizabeth Poole, in a darkened room on the second floor of the house to use the Ouija board. After the first table tipping experiment, the two women switched to table tipping, and they would get the table to strike the floor in a regular rhythm up and down. The two felt this was an upgrade to the Ouija board that they had used before this time.
Which I kind of don't understand, because the table tipping seems like it would take so much longer because you got to go through the alphabet one at a time, whereas the Ouija board just is like boom, boom,
traces
boom.
It. Yeah, I don't know. This room became the main room used for experiments and was kept locked when not in use. A red bulb was in the center of the room for light. The Hamiltons also began to conduct experiments in other people's homes like Sylvia Barber.
The Hamiltons often worked with a medium by the name of Mary Marshall, and she claimed to be able to channel a German spirit guide named Tam, and that was T-A-M in all caps. Marshall was a British medium who was introduced to the Hamiltons by their nanny, Mrs. Poole, and she manifested raps, levitation of tables, writing on glass, and knotting of handkerchiefs under the table leaf. During a seance in 1932, T.G. photographed Marshall producing a nasal ectoplasm with various images in it, including the face of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. The plasm sure looks like cheesecloth to me, but, Doyle actually visited Hamilton House and took part in a seance, and he claimed that a table went flying across the room. He described Winnipeg as a psychic center. The Hamiltons never claimed to be spiritualists and were active members of the United Church of Canada, which I found interesting. So they have all these spiritualists coming to them like Mecca, only they're like, we're not spiritualists, we're Christian.
Definitely a unique situation.
Yeah. Guests they invited to witness the seances and participate included lawyers, fellow doctors, and even clergymen. T.G. had started down this road because of the death of his son Arthur, and he claimed that he had contacted Arthur. There were some famous deceased people that the Hamiltons also claimed to have contact with, and these included missionary and explorer David Livingstone, British author Robert Louis Stevenson, and preacher Charles Haddon Spurgeon, which I have some works by Spurgeon, so I'm like, holy cow, he's coming through. Hamilton made great effort to prevent fraud during seances as well. Because, again, keep in mind, he's a doctor. He wants to do this scientifically, so he really wants to make sure we don't have any fraud going on here. From the start, Hamilton had taken measures to preclude the possibility of fraud during the seances. He would set up 11 cameras to catch all angles and had a remote control apparatus.
Wow.
So he was pretty high tech for his time. He and his guests would physically check mediums and sitters before any experiments. Mrs. Poole even channeled a ghost telling the group they needed to give mediums a sponge bath before seances to guard against fraud.
Okay.
Now, I don't know if this was fully the dude, but I'm thinking, was Mrs. Poole like into that kind of thing? And so the spirit that she channeled through suggested it, or I'm not sure what the heck we have going on here. But anyway, they would get a sponge bath and then they would put them in this kind of flowy, roby kind of thing so that people could make sure they didn't have anything hidden, nothing up their sleeves. We're actually surprised that Mrs. Poole didn't go for the massage add-on.
I mean, at least your feet.
And special scrutineers were invited specifically to watch for fraud. And keep in mind, the room is dark. They do have this red light, so it would be kind of hard to see any sleight of hand. But politician William Lyon Mackenzie King attended a seance in August 1933, and he wrote of the experiments in his diary that they were, quote, amazing beyond all words. TG wasn't shy about sharing his findings with his medical peers either. The British Medical Association and the Canadian Medical Association held a joint convention in Winnipeg in August of 1930, and Hamilton presented the results of his psychical research to more than 500 delegates. I mean, this is a medical convention, and he's like, can I show you guys a few things here? A little bit, should we talk about the afterlife? Look at what I found. And these people are just sitting there, they're like mesmerized. Dr. Henry Bruce Chown had participated in several of the investigations, and he came out as a believer in the phenomenon, but he also interestingly said that he didn't believe that it was a result of spirit activity. So he's like, something is happening here, but I don't know that it's ghosts, and I have to agree. Because, Kelly, you and I, when it comes to psychical stuff, and even when we did our interview with Amy Bruni, she says, I think a lot of this ghost stuff is us generating something.
Like tulpas.
So basically, that's kind of what this doctor is saying is like, I know something strange is happening here, but I don't know that it's spirits. And so I really like where we're going with that because these people are trying to say this isn't fraud. They're not trying to get famous or make a bunch of money with this. They literally are trying to figure out something here scientifically. And so coming at it from that angle, I'm like, well, that is more believable to me. That's not me saying that I don't think some fraud was going on here, but I think at its base, when they were having something happen that seemed unexplained, he's like, yes, but I don't think it's ghosts. And of course, that's the side many of us would fall on. And you know, Kelly, as we look back on our episode on Carl Jung, he definitely was finding other possibilities for unexplained events, especially of the psychical nature.
Indeed.
A lot of it was the human mind doing things.
TG's experiments came to an end on April 7th, 1935, when he had a massive heart attack and died at the age of 61. His wife Lillian continued to conduct seances until 1945, and Hamilton House continued to be a meeting place for a circle of spiritualist mediums. TG had always thought of Lillian as an equal, and she partook as much in the research as he did at a time when women didn't get much credit for that. T.G. Hamilton hadn't published a complete record of his research on psychical phenomena before he died, so his children continued his legacy. His youngest son, James, edited a book Hamilton had started called Intention and Survival: Psychical Research Studies and the Bearing of Intentional Actions by Trance Personalities on the Problem of Human Survival.
Talk about a
That's
subtitle.
A lengthy title, and got it published in 1942. His daughter Margaret published a sequel named Is Survival a Fact? Studies of Deep Trance Automatic Scripts and the Bearing of Intentional Actions by the Trance Personalities on the Question of Human Survival in 1969.
And
they
that
enjoyed
was
long
even
titles. They got to get all the details in.
Apparently so. Margaret lived in the house until 1986. She eventually sold the house and it became a variety of businesses like the Olive Branch, which was a gift and art shop that sold work crafted by artists in Kenya and other parts of the world. The upper stories were rented out as Airbnb apartments for a time. The Hamilton House was acquired by the current owner, Gags Unlimited Inc., in 2021, and they have put forward an effort to share not only the house with the public, but to rebuild its energies and continue to conduct psychical experiments. They offer meeting space, tours of the house, group seances, metaphysical workshops, and psychic readings. There's also a shop on the first level. And they offer overnight private paranormal investigations because the house is reputedly haunted.
You don't say.
You don't say.
Cheryl Weeb, who owns Gags Unlimited, has had her own experiences in the house. She told Winnipeg CTV News, "My personal experience is when I was waiting for the appraiser and I was at the front counter, which is right 10 feet from the door, and I heard a knock at the door. I went to go and answer the door, and it is glass, and nobody was there. So I went to the back door thinking someone was there, that it was the appraiser, and nobody was there. Weeb said a similar experience happened when she was renovating the home with her son. He went to use the washroom and heard a knocking sound. When he returned, he asked his mother if it was her. I said, "I'm not knocking, I was hanging wallpaper." He said, "I was downstairs and somebody knocked on the door," and he knocked on the wall. He said it was clear like that.
CTV News' photojournalist Zachary Kitchen, who shot the interviews, had some weird experiences. Nearly all the batteries on his electronics drained. And this next one is really weird. He was using a wagon to haul his camera gear, and when he was unloading the equipment for the shoot, he found a ring that he hadn't put in the wagon. Turns out this was a ring that had been found buried in the carpet during renovations by Cheryl, and she kept it on a counter. Only Cheryl and Zach were in the house at the time. And she's like, I didn't put it in there. And she goes, and he would have not even been where this ring had been, and there'd be no reason for him to put it in there.
Weird. Psychic medium Bernice Bisson had an opportunity to read the house one summer, and she experienced doors opening and closing on their own and unexplained noises. There's a window on the second floor where many people have seen a woman in the window when no one is in the house. She seems to be gazing out across the street to the cemetery where all the family members are buried. This woman even showed up in the listing picture when the house was for sale. She appears to have short hair and light-colored clothing.
Of course, this is a window picture, so I sometimes think that's pareidolia, but
Right.
It's very interesting that they were like, this house is for sale, and somebody looked at the picture and went, what's that in the window? Many of the photos captured by T.G. Hamilton seem hard to believe, but they have garnered a cult following in the artistic world. And despite the fantastical claims of the Hamiltons, they were very much respected and continue to be even today. So it wasn't like they were derided for that. The fact that the University of Manitoba took their collection and have shared it with the world is proof of that. In the end, it's up to the listeners to decide. Did the Hamiltons and their various friends and guests contact the other side? Is their former home haunted? That is for you to decide. And in the show notes, I do have a video that's a link to some of Hamilton's ectoplasm photos. These photos have inspired artists around the world. There have been books written on it, all kinds of stuff. So people absolutely love these pictures. I look at them and go, these are as real to me as those fairy pictures that Sir Arthur Conan Doyle was putting out everywhere.
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe they really had stuff coming out. Whatever they were doing, they pulled it off really well because TG believed everything, it seems. So I do believe they were contacting something occasionally. We'd love to have you guys check out our website at historyghostbump.com. And if you'd like to send us some feedback, you can do that at historyghostbump@gmail.com. We got a really great comment from a woman named Lydia after she'd listened to our old Sacramento episode. She says, I just listened to this episode of your podcast on my way to and from Old Sacramento to conduct a ghost tour.
Excellent.
So she's one of the tour guides down there. I was like, yay. She loved it. And she said that we did a fantastic job, which, I mean, that just means the world to me when people tell us that, because we try really hard to get the facts straight.
Right.
She said the historical facts were spot on, and we even taught her a few things that she didn't know before. She said that the tour guide that had trained her said that he'd had guests take a photo of him in front of the Sacramento History Museum and got those dancing orbs around him, which I believe is probably the gentleman we were talking about on that episode, because he's the one who's been doing these tours for years. She said, yes, please come out sometime to look around and check out the Delta King, as well as the several other interesting and rather haunted spots. You'll love shopping at Evangeline's, touring the museums, and enjoying some tasty food along the way. Don't forget to swing by Dorothea Puente's house to take some photos while you're here and check out the Old City Cemetery. And apparently, Dorothy Millett is buried in the Eastlawn Cemetery there in Sacramento, too. We actually did an episode on Dorothy Puente for one of our phantasmal crimes, so go by that house. And can I see the backyard?
Oh, dear.
Buried all the bodies.
How many bodies are back there?
So thank you so much, Lydia, for those comments. We really appreciate them. And if you guys go on the tour there, see if you can find Lydia and say hi to her. We want to thank you guys for joining us on this episode. I've been your host, Diane.
And this has been Kelly.
You take care now. Bye-bye. This episode is brought to you by our executive producers.
Dispatches from the Grave Digger.
We want to welcome into the cemetery Jennifer Lyles. We're going to be burying you in a garden crypt. And in 3 months, you'll be getting your HGB logo mug.
Thank you so much for supporting History Goes Bump.
Be sociable. Drop the chain rattling, neck biting, and shape shifting, and join us on Facebook and Twitter at History Goes Bump. Like the page and follow us.
Whether your dogs are grilled, pan-fried, rotisseried, toasted over a campfire, or boiled. And that's the way my dad always made them too. Served on a fresh-baked erp.
It's white erp.
It's fresh-baked erp. Oh, God. We're eating erp today. Should be talking about that with hot dogs, too. You never know what's in that hot dog. Where did this meat come from?
Ew, it's a mystery.
They were known as Selkirk settlers, and their presence testified.
Ooh, I don't know.
Is that like intestinal or testifying? I've just mixed them together.
The house was built in the classic revivalist style, which combined Greek and Roman.